Okay, I think we got it. All right, everyone. So can you see my full screen now? Aaron, can you nod if you can see it? Great, thank you. All right. So sorry about that technical glitch. Everybody, thank you and welcome. Just letting in more people. Okay, my name is Sian and I'm a member of the ASIG committee. Welcome to our monthly member meetings. We started these meetings at the beginning of 2021, and it's been quite a busy year for us. It's been quite a busy year. As you can see, we had a diverse range of topics and speakers this year, and the whole idea of running these member meetings was to support and bring together academics, consultants, environmental practitioners and managers and students and like-minded people to network and also to discuss academia and research related topics. We've had quite a busy year and we've had hundreds and hundreds of registrations, and tonight we're actually completely booked out for this presentation. And it's actually a really nice way for us to finish. This is our final member meeting for 2021, but we will be back in 2022 with a brand new lineup of topics and speakers. So keep your eye out for our next member meeting on the 3rd Thursday of January. We always welcome new ideas and speakers for this series. So if you do have any suggestions of topics that you think would be of interest to all of our members, or can even recommend speakers, please do drop me an email. My email is at the bottom of the page, smeckham@connect.hku.hk. So just before we move on to the presentation, I have just one more item that I'd like to raise for our members. Here we go. You might be aware of the CIEM awards, which are given out annually. The ASIG has been working very hard this year to develop a new academia related award called the University Program Department of the Year Award. And this award provides an opportunity for universities to showcase their high teaching standards, but also values things like involvement with partners and local projects and professionals, as well as the promotion of professionals in ecology and the environmental management field. So if there are any academics who have joined us tonight who would be interested in nominating for this, please do check out the CIEM website. I've given the link below. Nominations close at the end of January, and we really hope to hear from you and see the exciting stuff that the different universities and groups are doing. So just a formality before we have our speaker start. There's quite a few of us tonight on the chat. So what normally happens is we have a short presentation and a Q&A session afterwards. We ask that you remain muted during the whole presentation. And because there's quite a number of people to help manage the discussion, we'll ask you to put your questions in the chat, and then we'll try and get through as many as we can in the discussion session. So if I can pass over to Aaron and he can share his PowerPoint. Oh, actually, so Aaron, just before I move on to you, I'd like to welcome you. We're delighted to have you here. Aaron actually was the head of conservation and the lead trainer at Wagtail UK Limited for 9 years, which is one of the earliest adopters of using wildlife detection dogs commercially. He's now an assistant trainer and handler at Pause for Conservation, focusing on the continued development of detection dogs. And he tells me they're infinite uses. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about your work, Aaron, and I'll hand over to you.
Right. So as long as everybody can hear me and everybody can see the screen. Yeah, fantastic. Sean's nodding, that's a good thing. So yeah, thank you very much. Like Sean said, my name's Aaron Klein. Majority of my career was at Wagtail, and now I've left Wagtail and now with Pause for Conservation. So this it's like a brief kind of a history of what I've done, what I've seen using dogs for wildlife detection, and also kind of their limitations, their pros, their cons, and then obviously the discussion around it as well. So as I'm going through it, just any questions you might have, just pop in the chat. There is a discussion bit at the end, but obviously anything I'm saying as I'm going through, please just feel free to ask any questions about absolutely anything. I love talking, and I know it's got to be brief, so I will be obviously cutting through the slides. So if there's anything you need to know more about, obviously just ask away. I love bull breeds. That's why there's that beautiful photo there. I just found that on PowerPoint, but I loved it so much I thought I'd use it. Okay, so this is just a brief history about myself and the work I've done. So first of all, I started in rescue centres, and then I moved to Wagtail Kennels, where I was the kennel manager there. And then I was trained for the security side for detection to begin with. So that was mainly tobacco and cash, where we worked with HMRC and training standards, and we went all over the UK looking for illegal tobacco and cash, which was a huge amount of work, absolutely massive. And then also alongside that was drugs and explosives work as well. So where my qualifications are involved, that's where my qualifications lie. It's in handling of those detection dogs. Because at the time, at this point, there isn't really a nationally accredited course for wildlife detection. There is companies that provide them themselves. I do know that. Whereas in the security side, there is like what's called NASDU, which is the National Association of Security Dog Users, that kind of govern the security sector with detection dogs. So that's where my qualifications kind of are, in this kind of work. And then in about 2014, there was the opportunity to kind of head up the conservation side of Wagtail. So at that point, there wasn't a whole lot of work. It was in its infancy, really. And so we had a tiny bit of bat work. But as I took it on, we didn't have any dogs that could do the work, because the old head of conservation took her dogs with her. So they just said, Aaron, do you want to take on this role? I had degrees in animal sciences and stuff like that. Not that that helped me at all. But do you want to take this on? And, you obviously need to start training dogs. So I had knowledge, obviously, with training tobacco and cash dogs and drug dogs. But this was just a whole new ballgame. So I got 2 rescue dogs, which were Ned and Sasha at the time. And I put them onto bat carcasses to begin with, because that's where we had this little bit of work. Back then, I'd no way call myself a head of conservation. I was just merely a handler and a trainer. Head of conservation came years and years later, when I felt confident enough to call myself that. So we trained up these bat dogs, and then after that, we kind of continued on and looked at the possibilities there were with wildlife detection dogs. So we had this bit of bat work. We then had a bit of pine marten work. It wasn't huge. There wasn't a massive call for it. I think part of the reason was that, the general ways of looking for pine marten activity were quite good. So, camera traps or hair traps, they were quite efficient, I guess. Obviously, dogs are, yes, they are great. They're an added tool. It was scat detection, so obviously finding pine marten scats. So we trained a dog on the scat, and we did discrimination training against other scats, so badger and fox. anything that the dog could get confused by or the handler could get confused by. So the dog was only detecting pine marten scat, but there wasn't a whole lot of work, but you know, it was something else. So Sasha did that as well as bats, because you can multi-train dogs to a certain amount of disciplines. As well as that, we did overseas work. So we had dogs that detected product of animal origin. So I've just put pangolin scale and ivories there for examples, but it was a whole host of things: cheetah skin, parts of lion, you know, parts of gorilla. It's all a bit grim, shark fin. I wasn't directly involved in this, but this was going on within the company. But something I did do was live animal. So that's animal smuggling, and that was in airports in Asia. So up to that point, I'd done obviously bats and pine martens and tobacco and cash and things like that. And those types of detection, it's scent specific. So your dog is detecting a dead bat, and that's what it's detecting. Your dog is detecting pine marten scat, and you don't want it detecting anything else. So you're training the dog on the scat itself. When it came to live animals, it was completely different, because it's not species specific. They obviously were looking for endangered species or highly smuggled species coming through the airports. I couldn't get my hands on all those species. So what you're training a dog at this point is you're training a dog to detect anything alive. So it's less scent specific, species specific, and it's basically just, if there's something alive in a bag, in somebody's pocket, in a box, then you're going to tell me that there is something alive in there. So obviously with dogs, it's all to do with scent. So we just got as many different animals as we could possibly get our hands on. We started with my ferret because it was stinky and it would happily sit in a bag. He was called Tim. So we started with Tim, and then we kind of just moved along to things we could get. We had GCN at the time, so we used GCN. We went to all the local colleges. We used whatever we could get: small furries, reptiles, other amphibians. I think we had some giant hissing cockroaches, basically any, I think we had some chickens as well actually at some stage. So anything we could pop in a bag and we could train the dog to find, that's what we did. And it, like I said, it wasn't a scent specific task, it was anything alive. So when it came to that, part of my brain also thought that, okay, the dog starts to smell the item in the bag, but then I wonder what secondary kind of sense then comes into force. Does the dog then hear the animal, because the animal's making some sort of noise, breathing, might make a tiny bit of noise anyway, scratching? So I often wondered whether that was just scent work or whether something else came into effect as well, but just waffling now. Along with that came meats, so that was just quarantine work, so that wasn't to do with wildlife, it was just meat being smuggled through the airport. Great crested newts, which I will come on to, that obviously became a large focus of my career and continues to be. And then with the great crested newts came studies and the, not the accreditation, but the research I did with Atkins into the efficiency of dogs detecting GCN. So then August last year, I left Wagtail. Then I've now joined Rachel Flavel, who owns Portal Conservation. We're old friends anyway. So I've joined her at Portal Conservation and as a handler and assistant trainer. Okay, so I'll just go into a little bit more detail of the kind of work that the dogs have done in the past. I'll keep it brief, like I said, and then we'll start to discuss how the dogs are at detecting. So I'm not including any videos in this presentation because I just find the videos, they take up a lot of time. And also, I think if you know what you're looking at when you're looking at working dogs, all you do is critique, because I do it all the time. And then if you don't know what you're looking at with working dogs, all it is a dog running around a field. So a lot of the time, the videos, you don't really gain a lot from it. But I just threw in some nice photos, so you've not just got me talking at you. So bat and bird carcass detection dogs, I might be talking about something that some of you have heard about before anyway. This is extremely popular. This is the thing that I've been doing the most of through my career. Very popular. The dogs are very, very good at it. The picture in the bottom left, you can see with that yellow flag, that's because there is a dead bat there. I included that picture, obviously, so you can see how difficult it is, even on hard standing, to see a bat. So that bat, I think, had been run over as well, because it was part of the road surface. So it's flat, it's the same color as the hard stand, and yet the dogs can find it. And that's just to provide an example of how good the dogs are. Generally, when you're working your bat dog, I say bat and bird at this point now as well, because at the beginning, it was just bats, because bats are the species that you wanted to find. Bats are the protected species. So that's what they cared about, that was getting struck by the turbines. Over the years, the dogs just learned to detect basically anything that had died. So to begin with, we were training on dead bats because that's what we wanted. But just through the evolution of the dogs working, they would then start to find anything that was dead, because they taught themselves to just detect the smell of death, the decay. So along with that, we started finding a lot of birds. Then I started to speak to ecologists and would say, you know, are you interested if we find a bird carcass? Do you want me to, you know, do you want me to log it? Do you want me to take photographs of it? And over time, more and more and more of them started saying yes. So we then started to train the dogs on birds. In my brain, because I overthink everything, I then started to think, oh, well, a bird is generally bigger. It's going to smell more. Will the dog start ignoring the bats? So to begin with, the main reward was on bats, and then the dog would almost get a lesser secondary reward on birds. Yes, they would get a reward, but it wouldn't be as exciting as the bat reward, because I worried that they'd then start missing the bats. This never ended up being the case, because dogs are absolutely amazing. So then now we just train on bat and bird, and the dog will always get its main reward, generally a toy of some description. That's kind of how I work. But some dogs have food, doesn't really matter. It's whatever the dog will work for, basically. So you work in your bat dogs, and then they will generally work a figure of 8 in front of you, or they'll cross side to side, and you'll work a mapped out radius around each turbine, and you'll just walk transit lines up and down, up and down, up and down. Transit lines generally 5 meters apart. And then once you've completed your radius around the turbine, that's that turbine complete. And then you will obviously move on to the next one. So through training, you will obviously teach your dog to give what we call an indication. So that is the dog telling you that it's found its target scent. So the bottom right picture there, Willow, that's her pointing. So her indication is just to stare and point with her nose fairly close at the target species. So a bat, for instance. There's a lot more that goes into it. It isn't just the indication alone. There's a lot of focus put into indications in dogs, and it is obviously very, very important. But as a handler, you're just constantly watching your dog, because there is a lot of precursors and there's a lot of behaviors that are displayed before the dog then displays the indication. There may be a change. The dog may follow the wind somewhere. The dog may look like zigzagging on the spot, trying to figure something out, and you're looking for all these behaviors as well as the final indication. And I've said there as well that it's not just the whole bat or the whole bird that we're wanting to find. Often I've had just wings, so the actual body of the bat's been scavenged and there's just 2 wings left behind. The dogs will find those. It could just be a blood spot, it could be a feather spot, it could be a bit of fur. I've had a bat that's been decapitated, so the head was in one part, which the dog found first, and then the rest of the body was then somewhere else. And even now, well, Willow is the only dog that I've known to do this. She's done this twice with Rachel. The top right picture is a live bat. So Willow's now found 2 live bats on site. So this is the importance of not just dealing with the smell of death, as it was, you know. I know in America, a lot of them train their dogs to detect dead crickets, and then they just kind of get the dog used to the smell of death, and then they move up to bats. But we like to focus on bats for this very instance, that the dog will understand the smell of a bat. So if there is a live bat on site, the dog will find that as well. So Willow's found 2, and I do lie, actually, Flash found 1 as well. My old dog Flash with Rachel, he found a live bat as well. The bats all survived. They were taken to carers, they were released, so they were just stunned by the turbine at this point. So if the dog gives its indication, or the dog's shown a load of interest in an area, handler will go over, investigate, obviously photograph anything. This is exactly the same for ecologists. You know, I'm obviously just letting you know we do the same thing. Photograph, GPS locate, collect the evidence. And then multiple times a year, the dog teams as well will perform efficiency trials. So this is when an ecologist will go onto site, they will place a number of bats out on the whole site, on the turbines to be searched. They won't tell us how many bats, and then the dogs will work as normal, and then the efficiency bats will be recorded. So the purpose of this is to find out, obviously, as the title suggests, how efficient the dogs are at finding dead bats and birds. So if a dog finds 8 out of 10 bats on efficiency trials, then the dog is 80% efficient at finding bats. So if throughout the whole year, the dog finds 80 operational finds, then the ecologist would say, well, it would actually be 100 finds, but because the dog's only 80% efficient, that's why they've only found 80. That's the purpose of the efficiency trial. But for clients, it's a really good way to test the team, because there is obviously courses that you can do to become a wildlife detection dog handler, but where there is accreditation, obviously, and like yearly assessments, that's not a thing yet. So an efficiency trial is a really, really good way to see if your dog team is working correctly. So obviously, if a dog is finding 100%, 80%, brilliant. I think as you start to slip down into the 50% range, I think that's slightly concerning, because from my personal experience, dogs should be more efficient than that. And obviously anything lower than that, then that's a real big worry. So it's a real good way, because it's going to happen anyway, these efficiency trials, a good way of testing the dog team. So GCN. So obviously there's ways to track GCN and to survey for GCN at the moment anyway. Dogs are just this obviously added tool, and the purpose is to kind of try and hopefully speed up. So when I first started training the dogs, the ecologists were like, well, we're hoping that maybe instead of 5 days with bucket traps empty, for instance, we could get the dog in for a day to survey an area, and then we could reduce the 5 days to 1 day. Obviously, that's not their choice to make. This obviously all goes through Natural England or Natural Resources Wales. So that's not their choice to make. But I think this was the hope, and this was the plan, that by using dogs, am I drawing on my screen? Well, there's things on my screen, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, so hopefully these things would speed up the process. And that's the purpose of the dog. So just like the bat carcass, the dogs would give an indication on a GCN, and then the GCN would be moved to a receptor site, or it would just be recorded that there's GCN in the area. Recently, I got my class license to be able to handle newts. So as a dog team, obviously that's really, really good, because it means I can handle the newts and identify them, whatever I need to do. Dog teams in the past haven't been able to do that. They would have always needed an ecologist on site to do that kind of work for them. So more and more, this was happening, that dogs were then being used during the hibernation period. So I think this was so when they left the hibernation period, ecologists were then in a better position to just then crack on. Are there newts here? Aren't there? Well, we can kind of survey in the hibernation period. So when it's March, late March, when temperatures are right, we can just crack on if the dogs have said there's no GCN there. Now, that's great for ecologists, but it's really, really difficult for dogs. Now, the reason being is because you obviously can't disturb at that point in the hibernation period. My dogs were given loads and loads of indications that I could do nothing about. I couldn't lift up slabs, I couldn't dig holes, I couldn't move or disturb anything. My dog would give an indication, and I would have to say, obviously, I trust my dog. Yes, my dog is correct, but I couldn't prove that. So I couldn't then reward my dog either, because yes, I trust my dog implicitly, but until I have that physical evidence there, I would not reward my dog, because there have been instances of dogs indicating on residual smell rather than GCN itself, and I don't want to reward on residual smell. Well, I certainly didn't want to at that point. So my dogs were going through all these days of searching, giving all these indications, 10 indications a day potentially, and they weren't getting a reward. So that was really, really difficult, because then I'd have to go back, do loads of training again so they could have lots of positive reinforcement, because all those non-rewards was just negative reinforcement for the job that they were doing. And that's what I mean by potential issues. it is the most difficult discipline I've ever done. It is not something that you can just knock out in 2 or 3 weeks, get a dog easily on it. It is extremely difficult, and it's to do with the animal itself. Obviously, GCN, it's amphibian. They don't seem to hold a lot of scent from what I can gather. The scent seems to be on their belly rather than the top, so all the scent kind of bleeds out underneath them. And you know, it's the training process, it's just everything that goes along with it. It's so difficult. It's just so time consuming. And you know, there's other people that are doing it. Wessex Water, Nikki Glover, she's a prime example. She's working operationally, but she's been doing it for years. She's doing all sorts of different research trials. It's something that just seems to be never ending. And then obviously with GCN, I did do the research and the testing with Atkins, and that comprised of 2 phases. So the first phase, which is just a general thing that we do with all kind of detection dog work, which is what we call odor ID. So that red rack you can see on the top picture, that's an ID rack. So you'll have a GCN in a number of these tins. So they're secure in a tin. There will be GCN or there won't be on this rack. Obviously the handler never knows. There will be other amphibious species in the odor ID rack that the dogs have to differentiate between and only give an indication on the GCN. And that's juveniles, males, females, obviously to cover the whole gamut, because you don't know whether males and females and juveniles are all going to smell differently to a dog. So this odor ID stage would be the first phase, and there'd be multiple runs of that. I think we went over 40 newts in total. And then the second phase was, again, detecting a certain number of newts, which I wasn't aware of, in a mixed vegetation plot that was plotted out like that. We had trenches dug in. There was an ecologist in each trench to see if the newt had left the area. It was in a habitat where GCN were anyway, so if a newt did wander out, then it's in its own habitat. That's where they were trapped from. And then the dogs would go in and they would give X amount of indications. I would call those indications, and then obviously dogs were 100% efficient or 90% efficient or whatever they were. And this is the best way I have found to be able to confidently test these kind of dogs, because the newts were loose. They weren't in a tin, they weren't in a pot, in a field, because in the early conversations about testing, oh, we'll just pop the newt in a tin and we'll pop it in a field. And I said, I guarantee you the dog will find that tin every single time, because even if you did discrimination training against the tins, the dogs will always be looking for the tin and then always be looking for the tin with the GCN in. I said to Atkins, those GCN have to be loose for this to be a robust trial. I'm just conscious of time as well to keep my eyes on it. Water vole detection. So this is something we're getting into now. So obviously there's other people that do it already. This is just something that me and Rachel are doing at Forest Conservation. I've obviously made a point there, it's water vole latrine detection. So unlike bats and GCN, we're not finding the animal itself. It's like the pine marten scat, it's the presence of the animal. And the latrine is the easiest thing to do. So ecologists can obviously go to riverbanks, they can obviously ID the water vole scat themselves. They've been trained to do that. The dog is just an extra tool now to maybe speed up that process or get to points along the bank where it'd be really difficult for a human to get to. So trained on scat. So you can see Willow swimming around there. So you want a confident dog that's confident in water and can swim, but you want a dog that is not obsessed with water, because I've had those dogs before, and as soon as you get to a point of water, the dog is in there. A lot of you may have dogs that are like this, and they just swim around, swim around, swim around. Now, that's all lovely, but really, you know, you want your dog to be focused on the task at hand. If the dog is obsessed with water, then maybe water vole detection isn't right for the dog. I just popped on this slide as well that with the indication, passive is important. So what I mean by that is there's 2 types of indication. There's a proactive indication that's not really used these days. And that's when a dog will scratch or bite a scent. And then there's a passive indication where the dog just gives an indication and doesn't interfere with the scent at all. And that's obviously what we want with any kind of wildlife detection, whether it is just a scat or a carcass. You don't want your dog to interfere with it. So obviously a bat carcass, if the dog starts to chew it and gnaw on it, then that's producing more wounds on that bat, and you want to know if it's the wind turbine that's responsible for the death of that bat. If it's something that needs DNA testing and your dog's going to get slobber all over, then that's going to interfere with that. Your dog could inadvertently ingest something if it likes to lick something or likes to bite something. So with the work, the passive indication is exactly what we want. Okay, so I'll start to throw some questions out here. So have a think about if there's anything you want to talk about, or if there's anything I'm confused you about so far. So the importance of the target odor. So the training sample I'm talking about at this point. So when you're thinking about what you might put a dog on for a dog to be able to detect, is it feasible to obtain that target odor? So, can you obtain it? Next point, is a license required? So majority of the protected species, yes, a license is required. Bat carcasses, you need a license. If you're looking at dormice, for example, and you want fur samples, then you still need to get a license. So it's important to think about these things, because just because something is difficult to obtain, it doesn't mean that you should go down an easier route to train the dog. The storage and the handling of the training examples is extremely important, because anything that training sample comes into contact with is then going to smell of that. So you're training your dog on bat carcasses, that bat carcass has been in a plastic bag, that bat carcass will now smell of plastic bags. So that bat carcass will smell completely different to the ones you're finding in the field. So for me, again, because I like to overthink everything, yes, it's easy to store bats in plastic bags, they stay in the freezer lovely, but I think it's also very important to at least have some in glass jars. Glass jars aren't very permeable and they're really easy to keep sterile. So in my brain, they would not pass on as much odor as a plastic bag would. You can obviously do discrimination training against plastic bags, plastic gloves if you're handling your target odors with plastic gloves. But again, even through discrimination training, so you're telling your dog, no, it's not the plastic smell, it's the bat smell, which is obviously absolutely fine. It's the bat will still smell, or the target odor will still smell of this plastic material. So it's important to have that in your brain, when you're thinking about working your dog in like a real world scenario, what you've trained your dog on. Degradation of samples. Now it's important, if you're thinking about carcasses, that you're training your dog on every single type of carcass, as in as fresh as you can possibly get and as stinky and smelly as you can possibly get, because you will potentially find all those different kinds of carcass samples in a real world scenario. So although some samples will degrade and you'll have to get rid of them because it is not what your dog is going to find, there's no point in training your dog on something if it's not got a real world application, if you're not going to come across it in the real world. But obviously other samples, there is potential to come across them. So although they start to degrade, it's still worth training your dog on them, but not all the time. Like an absolutely stinky bat, of course, is dead easy to find for a dog. A really fresh bat is difficult. So don't just focus on the degraded stinky bat. You've got to cover, all different kinds of carcasses, all different kinds of these training samples. And the assumption of scent. So what I mean by that is that as humans, we can assume something will smell of the thing we want it to, because we don't know. We're just, with our big human brains, we're just assuming that that is the case. A prime example is a swab. So in the very early days, we took swabs of GCN because we couldn't get a license to keep them. So you swab the GCN, you train the dog on the swab. Does that swab smell of GCN? Not necessarily. And because it's not necessarily, in my opinion, you shouldn't do it. What that will definitely smell of is swabs, because that is what it is. You do not know how much scent is on that swab, how long the scent will stay on that swab. So it's a futile process, really, because you are not training the dog on the target odor. You are training your dog on a piece of swab, a piece of artificial material. So it's this assumption that things will smell of the animal. Nesting material, again, is another one. Yes, it's easy to get nesting material of an animal rather than sample of the animal itself. But again, just because it's easy, it doesn't mean that you should do it. So a nesting material, what's it definitely going to smell of? Even if it's had a dormouse or a bird living in it, what's it definitely going to smell of? The nesting material. So you don't know if you're definitely training a dormouse dog, a nightjar dog, or whether you're definitely training a nesting material training dog. So when your dog comes into that environment and there is that kind of nesting material everywhere, can cause real confusion. Whereas if you're using feathers, if you're using fur samples, or if you're using the animal itself, you definitely know that you've trained your dog on that target odor. And then I've covered that anyway, training versus operations. So basically, you know, training really for real world, real life scenarios. You're not training your dog to pass a test, although testing obviously important. You're training your dog to what the dog will come across in the real world. Okay, so there's a small little picture there, if you can see it. Debbie shared this with me. So this was a research they did in Spain for back carcass dogs, where it is dogs versus humans, because I've never been involved in a project where they actually tested a dog versus a human and their efficiency ratings. There's some of these things that I would agree with, and there's some of these things I wouldn't agree with. So I'll go through it as I'm going through these discussion points as well. So at the end of this slide, we'll maybe open up some questions if anybody's got any, and then at the end of the next slide as well. So effects and probability of detection, obviously dogs versus humans. This was in Spain. So they're basically saying there that through their study that dogs were 80% efficient and humans were 10 to 20% efficient. That the carcass size didn't matter to the dog, but it did matter to the human. And I would completely agree with that. And I think probably most of you would, that to a dog, all the dog is focused on is the scent and nothing else. So of course the dog will find a small bat, a small pip, and the dog will find a noctule because it's just the scent, it is nothing else. Whereas a human may be more likely to miss a small pip than they are a larger noctule. The bottom two, I'm not too sure about, but we'll discuss them as well as I'm going through. So I've said there, obviously, and I've said earlier, that dogs and humans are both trained. They're both trained on what to find. Humans use eyesight and dogs use scent. Dogs and humans definitely both have limitations. There is this idea that a dog is, in a lot of cases, the be all and end all. So a dog is a machine and it will go out and do everything that a human cannot do. But that is incorrect. So I've said there that they have limitations on how they can work for humans and dogs. That is completely correct. Of course, you cannot work a dog all day because that is completely unethical and immoral. Although dogs obviously have a lot of energy and they love the kind of work, and I'm sure a lot of dogs would stay out, constantly, that doesn't mean that you should, because it can be detrimental to the dog. And also, they will get nasal fatigue, they need to rest. So humans and dogs both have limitations on how long they can work for. Just pop that one in there. So can humans be biased if they have too much knowledge on target odor? This is just me asking the question. I'm not answering it. All I mean is, if you have a real great understanding of where GCN, for instance, may hibernate, would you then look at some area and think, oh, there's no way GCN would be in there, so you don't search it? Whereas there's maybe somebody that has less information about a target odor. I'm saying you do need to know about your target species, definitely. But for me, personally, I don't know the best places for newts to hibernate. If I'm given an area with a dog, I would just search the whole thing regardless. I wouldn't focus on any one area. And that's what I mean by biased, but that might not be the case. Obviously, this is up for discussion. Can dogs be swayed by their handler? Definitely. So if you're handling your dog and you're not paying attention, and your dog may change because it's working into the wind, or it's going to go and find something and you're not paying attention and you don't notice it, and you just call your dog back and your dog's really obedient, it's like, oh yeah, okay, then you potentially just called your dog away from detecting something. So that's what I mean by that. The dog can obviously be swayed by how the handler works that dog. The handler's body position, where the handler's pushing that dog. All these things are extremely important because that is how the dog works, and the dog is responding to the handler's directions. So in the early days, I was working flash, I pushed him on, he worked ahead, it's on a wind turbine site, he then spun, shot back past me about 20 feet, indicated in a bush, lifted his head out, and then just carried on working. So if I'm not paying attention, or if I'm not that confident, I don't really know what I'm doing, I might just think, oh, whatever, carry on, But what I did is I wrote the rest of our transit line. I came back down. I put him back in the bush. He went back in the bush, lifted his head out again, looked a bit confused. Then I looked in the bush and there was basically just a rib cage in there from a bat, nothing else at all. So this was something he's not come across before. It smelled enough like it to pique his attention, but not enough to give his full indication. But because I could read his behaviors and I understood, then that's when I investigated. Are dogs able to search areas humans can't? Yes and no is my personal answer. So where they, on this picture on the left, they've said vegetation complexity. For a dog, they put stable. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. They are saying that a dog will find, maybe in the vegetation for this research, that was the case, but not in all vegetations. You know, there is a lot of vegetation I've found where the scent is really suppressed by the grass and things like that. And it's extremely difficult for the dog to be able to detect the bat or whatever scent that might be. Newts, for instance, you know, even something as simple as refusion mats, like tight, you know, carpet squares, they are so flat to the floor. A lot of the time, the scent does not escape from the edges, you know, and that's not really a vegetation. That's just, you know, somewhere where a newt might be. But these things can have a massive effect on the detection rate of the dog. And I've got to sites before where the bracken has been so thick, there is no way I would or could push my dog into it. So as ecologists, you might get to a site and think, oh, I can pick my way through there, I can pick my way through there, but a dog would be able to do it. Nah, not always the case. And I am a dog handler and a trainer, but a dog owner first. So if it's detrimental to my dog, then I'm not going to do it. And a detection rate's affected by the weather. So it's got there for dogs and humans without influence. So for a human, I would probably agree because all you're using is eyesight. For a dog, the weather can have a massive effect on scent. If it's torrential rain, again, that scent will be really dampened down. The dog will have to be extremely close to be able to get the scent and get the odor. In the warm weather, the scent plumes, spreads out more, the scent bubble is bigger, the scent picture is bigger, it's easier for the dog to get. But obviously in hotter conditions, it's more difficult for the dog to work for longer periods. They need more rest periods. So these things do definitely affect the dogs. So yeah, there's some things on there I don't necessarily agree with. And then just the last one there, and then we'll maybe answer some questions. A dog and human detection ability is affected by poor training. Well, the humans on this call can answer that one for themselves. I would think yes, obviously, if you're not trained properly in what you're looking for, but dogs definitely are. If the proper training isn't there, if it's not robust, there hasn't been some kind of outside assessment, then yes, dogs will definitely, and their detection rates will definitely be affected by that kind of training. And it's not just the training to get them operational, it's the constant continuation training that needs to be there as well. It's a full-time job every single day. Right, I think that's the end of those slides. So if there's any questions, I will answer them.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Let me put my video back on. Yes, so there have been lots of questions. Very interesting presentation. Thank you. I'm just quickly going back. So we had one from Thomas Faulkner, and he asked, what animal groups are by their nature hardest impossible to find?
Well, from what I've found, it's been amphibians because they don't give out a lot of scent. But I've only really worked with GCN. The other groups, like mammals, for instance, there's a lot going on. It seems you've got your fur, you've got your organs, you've got all the smelly bits, whether they're alive or whether they're dead. That just seems to be so much easier for the dog. When it comes to something like, you know, an amphibian or a reptile, that's when the dogs really seem to struggle. And I just think it's how the scent is displayed off the animal and how it comes off the animal.
Interesting. I'm just going to keep sort of working through the questions so that if I spot some that I can link together, I will try to. Rachel asked, it would be interesting to know more about the survey method. So she was interested in, you know, the number of times you're visiting, you know, is it at different times of year? I guess a bit like how a professional ecologist might have to conduct their surveys. Wondering if you could make some comments about that, and maybe in reference to some different species?
Yeah, definitely. So bat carcasses, it's through the whole, well, there's spring, summer and autumn mainly. So I think this year it was, God, off the top of my head, every client seems to be different with what they kind of want. There seems to be a pattern kind of falling in line where it's you kind of work for about 10-day stretches once a month, but you'll cover up to 3 different sites, and it's generally 6 or 8 turbines per site. So a while back, I kind of set a limit on the amount of turbines searched in a day if your search radius is about up to 60 meters, because I was finding it was taking me roughly, it could take you 40 minutes to an hour per turbine if you're taking into account the, you know, finding carcasses and logging them and resting your dog and all this different kind of thing. So I put a limit to about 8 turbines per site per day. So generally we'll work through the whole year with bats. There will be stretches. You could work a day and then the site has a break, and then you go back to the same site the next day and then the site has a break. So, but it's quite a difficult question to answer, because still at the moment, a lot of clients are asking different things. So some just want 10 days constant searching. Some want 2 days searching, but once a week. Some clients just want 1 day searching of half the turbines once a month. So I think a lot of it is obviously to do with the bat population on site. So we will search the whole year. We're working on a couple of sites over winter, but that's just for birds. It's quite a difficult one to answer, sorry, because there's just so many variances with what we're being asked. With newts, it doesn't seem to be a set standard of like times a year. It is just basically when they need you there, they will ask you to go. You will do your survey. It might be 1 day, 2 days, it might be a week, and then you'll just go again. It's just kind of what they need for site. And that's basically it. So through all that waffle, I don't even know if I've answered the question, but it's going to have to do with it.
No, I think you have, and it seems to, if I'm interpreting it correctly, different clients are asking for different things. It seems that there is no standard guidance for how often you should be going out. Do you want to make any comments about that? Do you think that there should be some?
Yes, I do, definitely. And I mean, the work that Exeter University have done has obviously been massive, and you know, they're all really pro dog, and they have put some guidance into place with, I'm sure it was, if my memory serves, it was searching every other day. So you would search a turbine, the next day the turbine would not be searched, I guess for potential bats to be struck, and then the next day you would search again. So I'm sure they had stated that the best way to do it is to search every other day. But of course, some of these turbine sites have 60 turbines on, you know, maybe even more. And they want to be able to cover the site, but without searching every single turbine, because that would take multiple dog teams, weeks and weeks and weeks to do, just to be able to maybe survey each turbine once. So a lot of the times they will pick a handful of turbines in different areas, like one on the edge of a hill, one next to woodland, one just stood on its own. And that's kind of like their cross section of the site. And then they will get the dogs to search them. But yeah, I'm sure it was once every other day, if memory serves. I think that's what they were getting at.
Thanks, Aaron. We're running out of time, so I'm just going to choose a few questions that I'm hoping we can answer quite quickly. Yeah. Rachel Richards has asked, how long does it take on average to train a dog to detect a protected species?
I would say generally 4 months-ish, but it does depend on the dog. Obviously, it depends on how quick they are. Some might be quicker at learning than others. I say generally about 4 months. With the first GCN dog, it took about a year. That was obviously because we were learning as we were progressing. I think generally 4 months is like a good period to get from a completely green dog to a dog searching competently.
Great. And Beth would like to know what advice you would give to someone wanting to get into this field who does not currently have a dog.
Oh, that's the question I get asked the most. It's very difficult. There are people that are offering courses, so you can just do a bit of research and just look at who is providing those courses. Obviously, just be careful who you go to and what experience they've got and what the course is like. If you want to get your own dog, again, you can look at trainers. There are trainers out there that will train wildlife detection dogs for you. Again, just do a bit of research and look at their history. You know, have they worked operationally with conservation dogs before? You know, do they have the experience to train your dog? It is extremely difficult to get into. I am extremely lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. So I'm extolling the virtues of this, but it's a difficult industry to get into.
Okay, I think we have, you know, being Sayin, we have lots of consultants probably joining us tonight. Chris Wright has asked a question which is probably relevant to them. He says, I personally have no doubt about the potential of detection dogs, but do you believe there is sufficient demand interest from within the consultancy sector, given it reduces their fees, or sufficient finance within the non-consultancy sector to make it viable or a non-niche technique?
Oof, that was a long question with lots of big words. Yeah, good question, because to get a dog team out, if you're a sole dog team, for a client, for a consultant, can be expensive, because they're not just paying for your time, they are paying you all the time you've put into training that dog and all the care it takes and all the money it takes to care for that dog. And that's why a dog team would charge hundreds of pounds a day. Obviously, I think if this became more popular, there's obviously two ways it could go. It could be, you know, it could be completely watered down and there's not enough work for everybody, and the amount that you could charge a day would be reduced massively because you're just desperate for work. Or it could increase the need for dogs because it's easier to get dogs on site, because at the moment you've got to amend licenses, like something like GCN, you've got to amend your license to be able to get your dog on site. But if it was more of a mainstream concept, then it would be easier to be able to use dogs because there's less of a rigmarole to get a dog onto site. You know, I think, thinking of GCN, for instance, imagine if it would be dead easy to get a GCN dog team on site. Okay, costs, maybe the costs are higher than just getting an ecologist to search on the site, but it's quicker and maybe more efficient, and there's loads of dog teams available. I think it could be really, really viable, because yes, there is changes with licenses, with regional licenses, but I think there's always going to be a need to be able to have to survey for GCN. And I do think if it was easier to get dogs onto site and there was more of them and everybody was on board with using them, I do think it's viable, definitely.
I'm sort of thinking back to, you know, the research that you showed us, the study, and your comments about how wonderful and efficient the dogs are. But there's obviously a lot of expertise within the ecological profession out there. Do you think it would be fair to say that there is this balance between using the amazing usefulness of the dogs, but also there are certain things that the ecologists just, you know, we have through all that experience and expertise, and that there is this balance between us working together to have the best outcomes for ecology surveys?
Definitely. This says detection dogs versus humans. It's not. It's dogs and humans, because there is no way a dog can do everything that a human can do. You know, the dog, I don't like the word tool, obviously, but the dog is there to enhance the survey, to whether it's to make it easier, it's to make it quicker, it's to make it more efficient. The dog is there to be used, but to assist the surveying team, the ecologists. That this is not a replacement. Ecologists obviously have all this, you know, they go through all this training, and every single time I would go out with them, I'd be learning something new, because I don't know anything. I know how to train a dog, you know, and they would say, oh yeah, well, this animal does this and blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, oh, right. And there's some things that I can then feed back into training to help me next time. But yeah, it's definitely this kind of cooperation between a dog team and between the ecological teams. And that's where personally I found it works the best.
Wonderful. Well, we've got 1 minute to go, so I think we're probably out of time, and I think that's actually a really positive note to end on. There are. I won't push up. There's a number of other questions that haven't been answered. If it's okay with you, Aaron, maybe some of those you could provide answers to, and we could put it in our next newsletter. For everybody who's joined tonight, the ASIG committee has quarterly newsletters, and we will have a follow-up on this. So please look out for it, and we can try to include some more answers. And please, Aaron, if you wanted to add a little bit more.
Yeah, sorry, it's just I've got one more slide, but it's all things we've basically answered anyway.
Go for it.
Just things like, it's not a simple process. We've obviously talked about this. It's not something that can just be picked up and done simply. You know, not all humans can handle dogs, and not all dogs are suitable for detection dog work. I mentioned before, there needs this continuation training for dogs. It is a full-time job. It is not, you have your fully trained dog and that is the end of it. It is constantly, every single day. And in the security disciplines, there is this kind of monthly or yearly assessments, or if you're going to use a dog team, then you will test that dog team. That's kind of how it is in the security world. And I only feed back to that because that's kind of where our qualifications are and assessments are at the moment. And I think there should be that should bleed through into the wildlife sector. And obviously this need for professionalism. Obviously ecologists as a whole work in a professional industry, and detection dogs should be seen as that. You know, it's not like an easy thing to do. We should always be professional with it when we're approaching Natural England or Natural Resources Wales to get our licenses for training dogs. There needs to be this professionalism through all of it, and that is basically it. So thank you very, very much, and I will of course answer any more questions on your next newsletter.
Thank you very much, Aaron. That was really, really interesting, and some really helpful information. So I'd like to, maybe if you could just stop sharing your screen, Aaron, and then I can see everyone again, although no one's got their videos on. Thank you everyone for joining and for your questions. As I said, for those questions that we didn't answer, I will keep a record of the chat, and we will try our best to answer some of those in our newsletter. If you are not a member of the ASIG, you can go into the CIE website to join, and then you will automatically be sent a copy of that newsletter. Otherwise, you also are welcome to get in touch with us if you have interest in the committee. So thank you everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you again in January. And thanks again, Aaron.
Thank you.